Hello and welcome to this tutorial on getting started with sculpting in Blender. My name is Hayden Falzon from falzonfantasy.com, and today I'm just going to be going over a few tips and tricks to get you started with sculpting in Blender. Now, a lot of beginners in sculpting, they get a bit daunted, especially when you start off with a cube or a sphere, and rightly so. I mean, how are you going to turn this into a person or a rock or an object? It's a daunting task for any beginner, but if you stick with this video, I'm going to cover a few ways that will help you get over that hurdle. One of my first tips is that don't start from scratch. Most people in the industry will not start from a sphere or a cube. They will actually start from a pre-made model or template. Usually that's handed down by a superior or a person that is above them, and then they're able to, from there, sculpt on that base mesh. So, following in their example, you can do the same thing. You can go to a site such as www.blendswap.com, where you can download free assets such as trees or people, but usually these are more completed assets. So, a better alternative would be to download something like Make Human. What Make Human is a topology assisted tool that essentially generates human meshes. So a link for that will be in the description. Another thing that you can do is you can make your own templates from scratch. One easy way to do this is to use the modifiers. If we have a plane and then delete all the vertices aside from one, and then set that vertex to the origin point by pressing Shift S and then selection to cursor, we can then add a new modifier and add a skin modifier. As you can see, what this is doing is it's generating a mesh around our vertex. This is very useful in generating mannequins and other sort of animalistic base meshes. If I extrude this vertex, you'll see that the mesh, the skin, is also extruded and generated along with it. This is an incredibly powerful tool that allows us to generate very quick and fast base meshes. So if you aren't using it, I highly suggest that you play around with it. You can use all the basic tools, but just be warned that scaling does not work by pressing S. Instead, scaling works by pressing Ctrl A. As you can see, you're able to scale on the vertex, and that in turn scales the skin modifier around that vertex. You can also constrain it using the Z, X, and Y constraints. So I'm just going to quickly block the form out of a Okay, there we have it. We've got our very basic base mesh. Now, as you can tell, we can actually already kind of see a form beginning to take shape of a hominid of some description leaning against their palm. So quite simple, very useful, and really gets the job done. So after I've done that, I probably want to actually duplicate that and move it, just so I have a backup copy, just in case I ruin this. And then I'm going to apply the skin modifier, making sure that I'm in object mode, because you cannot apply it in edit mode. Excellent. So you should see now that I now have a mesh. So instead of starting on a cube, I'm starting on a somewhat decent looking mesh already, which is fantastic for us. Okay. The next step would be to go over to our Sculpting tab, where we'll be able to begin sculpting. But before we begin, I want to impart upon you another tip. Do not go straight into detail. Okay? When you sketch a drawing, you don't begin by sketching all the details. You begin by blocking it out. Now I know we've already basically done a very crude block out already, but we want to expand upon this. We want to get the silhouette right. We want to get the shape right. We want to get the forms right. We don't want to go straight into high detail too soon. Unfortunately for a lot of beginners, what tends to happen is that when we begin sculpting, we automatically go Control D. If you don't know what Control D does, Control D activates dynamic subdivision or dynamic topology. So as you can see, my Dino Topo is checked now that I press Control D. And what that is doing, if I go into wireframe mode, is it's going to dynamically apply new topology to where my brush stroke is so that I'm able to sculpt in varying degrees of detail. If I zoom in, you'll see that the detail is incredibly fine. And a lot of people tend to zoom in and out and in and out, which is perfectly fine. But because of the nature of the default settings of Dino Topo, it's going to enable and encourage us to go into detail quicker than we need to. So one thing that I would highly suggest that you do is go into the Dino Topo drop-down menu, and then in the detailing drop-down box, set it from relative detail to constant detail. And what that essentially means is, if I go back into wireframe mode, if I start sculpting, you'll see that it details and generates me a lot of mesh. But if I zoom in more, it's not going to generate a relative amount of detail to the screen size, which is exactly what we're looking for. So that means you can zoom in as much as you want, and it's not going to generate any more higher detail mesh. So for beginning the sculpt, this is an excellent setting to have on. So with that out of the way, I'm then going to switch over to my clay strips brush, and then I'm going to turn my symmetry off because this is not a symmetrical piece. And I'm going to begin kind of putting in the form of this. I might do the resolution to about 6, just so I have more to work with. And I'll just begin really roughing out the form of this. So I'm going to use the clay strips brush in conjunction with the shift brush. So shift is the default smooth in Blender to really begin to sculpt something out. Another thing that you want to make sure that you're doing is that you're in perspective mode. Being in orthographic mode is useful in some cases, but especially for organic modeling, being in perspective allows us to really judge more accurately if our strokes are effective or not. As you can see, I'm just going over my mesh with the clay strips brush and then refining that stroke with the smooth. Okay, now that I've got to a somewhat decent structure, I'm going to increase my resolution again to, let's say, maybe 10. And then I can come in here and start doing a more, not refined pass, but a bit more detail in the base pass. So this will allow me to just begin to bring out the forms a bit more. In fact, I might increase it up to about 15 for this. And there we have it. We have a somewhat basic form all established, and it would be at this point that we would want to go into where we really look at defining more specific details such as eyelids, mouth, nose, ears, things like that. And if you would like to see a more structured tutorial on that, I will have a link of one in the description or at the end screen. If you'd like to see more tutorials on sculpting, please be sure to check out the channel. And I hope this tutorial has really helped kind of make sculpting feel like a far less daunting task. If it has, hit that like button. If you've learned anything, also hit that like button. Also consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that bell button. It will enable you to be notified upon a new video's release. And I'm doing a schedule now where I'm really trying to release a video every 2 days. So hit that bell button. But thank you so much for watching. This is Hayden Falzon from FalzonFantasy.com signing off.